I got out of my stuffy office today as it's a beautiful day down here in Dunedin. Now people often think we live in igloos down here and store our seal meat and our whale meat outside, but it's really quite not so bad. Thanks again for some really great feedback on that JORC video, and some people sent in some really good questions or suggestions on follow-up topics. So thanks for that. Today I wanted to go into one of those questions as it was quite an interesting one. Someone asked me, what is the deal with capitalization of specific words and terms in public announcements or other written correspondence? Is it mandatory or not? Is it a code breach or not? When do we use it and how to properly do it? In this video I'll give you my opinion on how it should be interpreted and what the repercussions are for getting it wrong. As always, like or subscribe and keep posting your questions, and please don't sue me for anything I say, it's not nice. Now clearly, as a native Dutch speaker, I am not an English language expert. I heard from a friend that when the JORC Code was being written, this topic was actually discussed at length, and it provided much disagreement between stakeholders, with disputes on common English usage and reference made to grammar manuals and so on. I'm starting off with my view of the general principle that defined terms are capitalized, like in legal contracts and other important documents. Now the JORC Code is not a contract and it is not legislation, but within it all capitalized words are clearly specifically defined. However, what is not there is a simple statement that you would expect in such a document, that capitalized words are defined terms, or any guidance on the recommended use of capitalization. Is that strange or is it intentional? The only reference to defined terms is in clause 12 of the code. This requires practitioners to use only defined terms in their public reports. Public reports dealing with exploration results, mineral resources or ore reserves must only use the terms set out in figure 1. But of course, terms as exploration target and scoping study are not mentioned in figure 1. So if people start using Optimisation Study as capitalized set of words in their public announcements, are they in breach? Or if they use scoping study uncapitalized, are they in breach? It is simply not very clear what is expected here. Incidentally, the JORC purists are quite particular about the non-legal nature of the JORC Code, and for instance are insisting we state that a report is in accordance with the JORC Code 2012 rather than in compliance with. However, regardless of the code not being legislation and regardless of the ambiguity around the coverage of clause 12, the various defined terms are still clearly capitalized throughout the code. And this sets the clear expectation that reports following the code should use this capitalization. For instance, the defined term public report is defined as reports prepared for the purpose of informing investors or potential investors and their advisors on exploration results, mineral resources or ore reserves. They include, but are not limited to, annual and quarterly company reports, press releases, information memoranda, technical papers, website postings and public presentations. Now I always point out that most people seem to think that the report, with a capital R if you like, is the resource geologist's technical report, whilst in fact this is called the documentation, which interestingly enough is uncapitalized in the code. The public report is the announcement or the other public statement which is made clear by capitalizing the words. Otherwise, it would be ambiguous. Another example, mineral resources as a plural noun is capitalized to provide a clear distinction between those defined by the code for the deposit reported on in a public report and those used in a more casual, non-deposit specific context, such as the mineral resources in the wider region or something like that. Some more examples. What about referencing mineral resources by other companies with nearby projects in your public announcement? Something like the adjacent Porgera mine has 20 million ounces of gold in total mineral resources. In my view, these resources are not specific to your deposit and therefore do not have to be capitalized. Should you use capitalization in your technical resource estimation report? Well, no, essentially not, as it is not a public report. I usually state in my own technical documentation something like public reports or public announcement issued by the company which refer to the resource estimation specified in this technical documentation will be required to comply with the JORC Code 2012, and information may be extracted from this technical documentation to support such public reports or announcements. In addition, such public report should contain a Table 1, the information for which can be extracted from this technical documentation. So, it's up to you whether you use capitalization in your technical documentation or resource estimation report. But of course, as the public announcement will be based largely on what you write in this documentation, it makes sense to capitalize things as it would be used in the public announcement. So my vote for clarity is for using appropriate capitalization in such documentation simply to avoid misuse in the eventual public announcements. Another one, if you are writing a PowerPoint for a presentation in Diggers and Dealers, then you will need to use appropriate capitalization when you discuss mineral resources for the deposit you are presenting on. It's an easy one. But how about referencing historic or foreign mineral resources in your announcement? You've got to be careful with this for several reasons. First, there are rules around reporting of such resources, and these are all specified in the ASX listing rules. But importantly, if and when you do refer to them, and assuming you tick all the right compliance boxes with regards to their use, they should not be capitalized as they were not defined or classified under the JORC Code that applies to the current public announcement. How about a recent one where a company announced they had come up with mineral resource, but it was not compliant with JORC. So by simply stating this, they believed that none of the code applied to it. At the same time, capitalization was used when inferred resources were presented in a table format. Not a good idea. And uncapitalizing those words suddenly wouldn't have made that announcement any better in any case. Right, what are the repercussions? Well, the lack of clarity of the code, plus the fact that in the contract between the listed company and the ASX, the listing rules, none of these terms are actually capitalized, mean to me that this discussion becomes a bit of a moot point, and repercussions will be very limited. So good luck to anyone complaining about lack of appropriate capitalization in a public announcement. To me, what it comes down to is the intent that misuse of capitalization commonly carries with it. If you're talking about or all the time, uncapitalized or capitalized for all I care, when discussing your mineral resources, you are in breach. If you're inventing new terms to bypass defined terminology, capitalized or not, you should be in breach. But, as we've seen, quoting an optimization study is technically, arguably not in breach of the JORC Code, in my opinion. But of course, if production targets and financial forecasts are included in these announcements, you have yourself a whole bunch of other problems, regardless of your terminology and term issues. So, to me, what is missing in the code is the line, defined terms are capitalized. Use of the non-capitalized equivalents of such terms is not allowed, unless they are not specific to deposit being reported on, or something along those lines. Perhaps a suggestion for the 2020 revision of the JORC Code? Anyway, thanks for watching, and don't forget to comment and subscribe, and see you in the next video.